Hey everybody, Brian Corey here from Necronomicast. Thanks for listening. I just wanted to wish you all a happy new year. Hope everything's going well in your neck of the woods. Here at Necronomicast, we are celebrating 14 years as a podcast. Started back in 2011 with Tim Welch and Wayne Brecky founding this show. Fast forward all these years and episodes later, we're heading up to episode 300 this year. Hard to believe. But it would not be possible without your kind listenership and support. So, in addition to listening to all these episodes in the next year, I invite you to come out to the Nebraska Bigfoot Conference here at Nebraska in April. Come out to the Missouri Paracon. I'll be making an appearance there. The Historic Haunted Heartland Part 4 will be happening in Omaha in October. Also in 2025, my new book, Reconsider Everything, will be released. And you never know when you turn on your television where you might see some form of the Necronomicast. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for all your kind support over the years. And I invite you to please leave a review over at iTunes or YouTube or any of those places. Follow me on social media and just enjoy the ride as we head out into the weird world that we all share together. Necronomicast, the horror of Hollywood and beyond. From the historic and haunted heartland of Omaha, Nebraska, my name is Brian Corey, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all, young and old, to this special episode of the world-famous Necronomicast. Happy New Year, everybody. Now, for this episode, the first episode of 2025, I am joined by an absolute delight of a guest and a true original spirit in the world of the paranormal. Darcy Staniforth is an American Studies scholar, paranormal investigator, writer, performer, and she's sought out for her expertise in popular culture, comedy, death, and unexplained phenomena. When not working with students both inside and outside of the classroom, she's a docent for the Kellogg House, a popular destination for historical ghost tours in Santa Ana, California. So please join me and Darcy for this special episode of the Necronomicast. And now calling in on the Necronomicast Newsmaker Hotline, I'm so excited through the wires of infinity to welcome from the OC, Darcy Staniforth. Darcy, how are you today?
I'm so good, Brian. I'm so happy to be here with you. I'm so glad we finally get a chance to talk.
I know, right? I follow these people, I discover them online, and I'm so happy to find out they're not Russian bots. They're real people doing real, incredible, creative things out there. So yeah, to have you on my show, I've been following you for a while and liking your videos and posts and watching your live feeds from different like haunted locations. So to have you on the show, it's a treat for sure.
Yay. I'm happy to be here. What a great way for me to start my Sunday. You're already well into yours, but you're in the future.
Yes. Through time zones, like how the Earth spins in its orbit. And I got a pie in the oven, so I'm watching that for sure. So
love it.
So yeah, I started following you because you have all these great posts and all these interesting things and ideas. And then I get to know that you're like an American Studies scholar. I'm reading your bio, you're a paranormal investigator, writer. I saw your TED Talk.
Oh, thank you for watching that.
For sure. Your expertise in pop culture, your stand-up comedy routine, background in stand-up comedy in California. So my gosh, it's like a Renaissance person here. Like,
thank you. I really like when it's phrased that way. Sometimes it just feels like people are like, you're so busy. And I'm like, I just want to get to do all the things that I want to get to do. So I've lived a lot of lives and working with students are like, you've also done that. I'm like, yeah, it's just, this is part of who I am. So
I don't think my kids get it sometimes when I tell them that I toured around and played around the country in a ska band. They're like, what? Like they see me play at church or my trumpet here or there. Or they see me play trumpet at, different community events and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, I played in New York. So I did these things, and it's a very strange life sometimes that I think I've led.
Yeah. And I was literally talking to a friend about it yesterday about the idea of, I'm not afraid of death. because I've lived a really full, incredible life, but I'm also not ready to get there yet. I have a lot of other stuff I really want to do.
I had an old acquaintance of mine, a friend of mine, and he said, I just want to be a gray-haired old man. Like, I just want to keep progressing. And like, my youth was great, but I just want to be a gray-haired old man for sure.
I mean, I think sometimes, and depending on how life took us, right? There are times you were probably like, I don't know that I'm going to make that. I don't, are we going to get there? And then we eventually get there. We get to do other cool things. Like when people are, it's like, oh, I hate getting older. I'm like, I love all the learnings that I'm gaining. Like, I don't need, I'm good. I don't need to be 22 again.
Oh no. Like I hit a milestone. I just hit 50 and I was just,
happy birthday.
Thanks. So so I did the, I sat down and kind of thought and took inventory of my life and I'm like, wow, man, 50, I feel a lot better about myself as a person. I feel smarter. I'm probably more healthy than I was at 40, definitely at 30 and 20. I didn't know a damn thing at 20.
But we thought we did. We were like, I've got it. And then you're like, well, maybe not so much. It's okay too.
Oh, I'm Gen X. We're going to change the world. It's going to be all different. And in some ways it's changed, but not the way I envisioned it when I was 20 for sure.
That's fair.
Hey, like when I was in my 20s and whatnot, earlier, like in high school, whatnot, I used to follow and listen to a lot of Henry Rollins. I used to read some books out of 1361.
Oh, yes.
Art to Choke Hearts. I think I got a copy around that someplace. I listened to his spoken word albums, which were comedy albums to me. And I saw him do some spoken word tours. And then I heard not too long ago that you worked for 1361 in the past in the offices there.
Yeah, I did. I worked for 1361 for about 2 years after, and I was a big Rollins fan for years before that. And then through meeting and getting to know folks, it was like, do you want to come help in the office? And then part-time turned into full-time. And it's purely because of working there that I got involved with the West Memphis 3 case and I'm still in ways involved in that exoneration, the quest for exoneration for those 3 and got, my little punk rock music heart getting to meet and spend time with people like not just Henry, but people like Exene Cervenka. And then Ian MacKaye when he was in town. Ian MacKaye is one of the kindest, best people on earth. Everyone should know how great Ian is. And he would always just come in and just kind of like plop down on the other desk and be like, how you doing, Darcy? How's things? Like he'd always just check in and it was fantastic. And then tying into West Memphis 3. And this is me fangirling, not name dropping. So, and people can be like, you're name dropping. No, I'm fangirling because I lost my mind after so many of these interactions. 2 of the ones that were just the biggest, like, about was when we were putting together the first West Memphis 3 benefit at the Troubadour. Henry had given me his Rolodex. And so I was putting calls out to people and writing letters to some people because we didn't have active phone numbers or current phone numbers. And I got a call from Tom Waits's office. And I was like, oh, I'm so excited to call Tom Waits's office back. Now, my brain is thinking, I forget that we were a small staff at 1361. We were not a corporate entity, but I'm figuring I'm calling back this more formal office. And I call back and trust me, you'll know if Tom Waits answers the phone. And he does. And I'm just like, keep it cool. And so I was like, oh, hi, I'm returning a call. And it was from his assistant. And he was just like, oh, okay. And so it was very odd to call and talk to Tom Waits and leave a message for his assistant about him. But that was amazing. And then probably my other happy, amazing moment where I came back and told my more direct boss, like, oh my gosh, is, working for the publishing house. Like I did everything. Like, so if in that time you ordered merch, I probably packed it. I probably read your fan letters. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was like one of those kinds of things. And so one morning, Carol was like, oh, I need you to take some books over to this hotel for Nick Cave's manager. And I was like, okay, cool. Because we had one of Nick's books on the label, and packed them up and drove over to this little beautiful boutique hotel in Hollywood. And I roll in to tell them, like, hey, I need to speak to Nick Cave's manager. And there is Nick at the little desk in the lobby writing postcards in a yellow cardigan, sipping tea. And he is also one of the most lovely people I've ever met. And I, again, had to hold it together. So it's like you don't want to go, you're Nick Cave. Like, he knows he's Nick Cave. I didn't say that, but it was a magical time where a lot of times I was like, my life is really weird right now and really amazing. And I get to meet all these incredible people. And my life was forever changed because of my involvement with the West Memphis 3 case.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about that for people that aren't familiar with West Memphis 3, but just to repeat, so far in the first 5 minutes of the show, we've talked about you meeting Ian MacKay, Henry Rollins, Nick Cave, and Tom Waits, all in 5. That's pretty awesome.
It's awesome. And again, it's not name dropping.
I get it.
Purely fan, like, oh, what? Because I've also had plenty of times where I've been at events where people are like, do you know who that is? And I'm like, I don't. And then, but their world has changed. Like, they're like, you just got to understand. I'm like, I am excited for you. Right. It. And that's the thing. Like, fandom is such a beautiful thing. And it is, when people can be excited about meeting people whose work and art and contributions have made an impact, it's really incredible. I know fandom can have some intensity to it for sure, but it's always great when you meet people and they're super lovely and incredible, and then you get to be like, hey, I really appreciate these things about you. So.
Well, when I take my pie out of the oven, I'm either going to listen to Repeater or In on the Kill Taker from Fugazi. And then, when they rolled in, when I was in college, they rolled through Nebraska, and I paid $5 to see them, true to form. So that was super cool. Now, West Memphis 3, I know that's very important, very, very important too. For people that are just kind of tuning in and learning about you and your background. Like, tell me a little bit about that, or tell us all about a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, in West Memphis, Arkansas, in the mid-90s, 3 8-year-old boys were brutally murdered. Michael Moore, Stevie Branch, and Christopher Byers. The fallout from that is that because this was such a horrific, awful crime, and it still is, and because of the religiosity and the timing, we were still in the thick, not quite of the 80s satanic panic, but we were still in the midst of satanic panic. 3 teenage boys, Damian Eccles, Jesse Miss Kelly Jr., and Jason Baldwin, end up getting arrested, tried, and convicted for the murders of these 3 young boys, all based around Jesse's false confession, because Jesse was absolutely coerced into a confession. And Jesse does not, he has a substandard IQ, would be considered a person with a mental disability by many standards, most standards. And there was problems all throughout it. But an old boys club, and there's a lot more to this, but they ended up, they convicted all 3 of them and sentenced Damien to die and the other 2 to serve life without the possibility of parole. And in 2011, as they were getting ready to file new motions that more than likely would have brought a new trial, the prosecutor's office offered what they called an Alford plea. What an Alford plea is basically where you admit guilt without admitting guilt. Like, you basically say that the prosecution has enough evidence that they could convict you, but you don't have to verbally say, like, I'm guilty. And the challenging thing about the Alford plea is that if you take an Alford plea, you cannot sue the state. And so, again, some bigger things than we'll get into now. Jason and Jesse end up taking the Alfred, like they all take the Alfred plea, because if you're, as our friend Burke puts it, if you were in hell and someone said, do you want to stay in hell or do you want to get out? And even though you're getting out and it's not perfect, you get to get out, you'd get out. And so they got out on the Alfred plea. But the challenging thing is that, I mean, there's so many challenging, I'm using this word, like I'm trying to be really diplomatic about this, but like what's awful is that all three of them are still convicted felons.
Right.
And I was just at a screening of the first documentary, Paradise Lost. There's Paradise Lost 1, 2, and 3, all done by Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky, incredible documentarians. And Bruce is no longer with us, but Joe was at the screening, and Joe made the point, like, if the West Memphis police and prosecution and judicial system all think that these three men, because they're men now, did this, and they truly think that they're these awful monsters, why would they ever let them out? Like, why would you wouldn't do that? And so you've got injustice on both sides. You have injustice because the murders of these three young children have never been solved. And these three men are still convicted felons, and it has deeply, deeply, deeply impacted their lives. And you still have people we call in the support realm, we call them nons. Like, I was only a few years back was at like a restaurant and I saw someone reading Mara Leverett's book, The Devil's Knot. And I, assuming, because to me, you look at this case and common sense tells you there's no way. And I walk up to this gentleman and I was like, oh, what do you think of the book? And he's like, oh, they did it. They're demons. They're the devil. And I was like, it caught me so off guard because I'm so not used to running into nuns in the world. And, you know, there are even some of the most outspoken opponents of them in the beginning understand now that they did not do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, Damien won a victory recently where he is going to be able to have DNA evidence in the case retested, because Arkansas is one of the few states where if you have been let out of jail, you can still have evidence tested. Not all states do that. And so his team is working on that. And of course, we're always hopeful that it's going to bring answers. So it's a challenging thing, and their story still needs to be told, because I always think about, like, what if we had something like Serial or, you know, Making a Murderer, like that kind of thing, in the way we have social media and the connectivity we did, or we do now. Back then, it would have been probably a different thing. But they were kids that liked heavy metal and listened to Metallica and wore black. Ooh, heaven forbid. And I think if it had been in any other major metropolitan area, Los Angeles or New York, like, they would not have ever seen jail time. But they come from a heavily religious, you know, socioeconomically challenged, underrepresented background. Like, they're poor, uneducated folks. And it was a witch hunt.
Yeah,
it was a witch hunt. So that is very, you know, I know folks on the listening to the pod can't see it, but that's what the skate deck is behind me there.
I've seen Paradise Lost, the first one. I didn't know there was a third one. I didn't know that.
So we were in the midst of fundraising efforts when they were doing the third one. We had one of the benefits I put on at the Hollywood Improv with, like, again, incredible people, where people called me up and were like, oh, how about we have Tenacious D on the benefit? Sure, that'd be great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Absolutely. Again, my brain's just like, that's happening. The HBO came to that benefit. They tried to come to another benefit of ours, and I love the owner of this particular venue, and he was like, "We only have 270 seats. They're not going to take up our seats. Like, don't tell them no." So I got to tell HBO no. Again, very strange. But we were in the middle, we had all that filming, and they were about to put out the third one when the Alfred plea came down.
Yeah.
And suddenly they had a new ending to this film. But all three are still such powerful documentaries, and difficult to watch because you are seeing murdered children.
Yeah, for sure.
But important. It's important look at our justice system. It's important look at, and this is where I get really spicy about people when they get out of jury duty because I'm like, look, you want people to critically think through things. You want a true jury of your peers, because if you get folks that have already made up their mind about your guilt or your innocence, like things like this happen.
Mm-hmm.
And of course it has a lot to do with like class and religion. And like, there's so many things tied into this.
Oh yeah.
But that's the briefest version of the West Memphis 3 case.
Well, I know it was very important. That's why I wanted to have you talk about it. And that's also kind of lights a fire underneath me to kind of re-investigate it for myself and watch Paradise Lost 2. And I tried to get Joe on the program. We were in talks about he makes so many documentaries all the time. I'm trying to remember.
All the time.
Yeah. He's like the documentary filmmaker of this era right now.
Yeah.
So I need to make sure I kind of stay up on things. Sometimes things cross your path and you kind of get into it for a while, and then something else kind of takes your attention away from it. But yeah, I knew that was super important too. And it's really cool that, like I focus a lot of paranormal, but also true crime. And I say this a lot, when the true crime is on my program, I'm not like, hey, here's my John Wayne Gacy show. Hey, here's my Ted Bundy show. It's more like, here's a opportunity to learn about the victims and how these crimes or whatnot impacted a community, and also the hard work, the tenacity, the gumshoe detective work of the investigators that try and find justice, and those that are trying to find justice after the fact, like with these documentaries and trying to right a wrong. I think, and that goes hand in hand with the paranormal, because you're trying to like lend a voice to those that have like lost their voice.
Absolutely. And, I think that's one of the things, because I also operate in that true crime space as well, not just because of this case, but in other friendships and relationships that I have. And, focusing on I don't need to glamorize a serial killer.
Right.
Like plenty of people, unfortunately, do that. And to be with, if you've ever talked to a victim of a violent crime, like it changes your perspective on things. And I was fortunate enough as press to go to CrimeCon this past year in Nashville. And that is the largest true crime convention in the country. And they do other events. They're like doing a cruise, and they're doing CrimeCon will be in Denver next year.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, it's going to be in Denver. So my hope is to be back there for Denver as press as well. And, one of the things that really stood out to me, because they, when you go through a press application in general, they'll ask about your credentials and like who you're writing for and what you're writing. But they really vetted me to make sure that I wasn't coming to sensationalize these stories or turn it into murder porn or gore porn, which is not my scene at all.
Right.
And they, and so then, and it's one thing to do it in an email, but to really see that they really worked to ensure that that is not how this convention was. Because the convention, like, you have the big speakers, right? You have these, you've got the amazing Josh Mankiewicz, the mayor of CrimeCon, he's doing talks, Matt Murphy, like all of these people doing these big talks, right? And then you've got the floor, right, which has vendors and it has podcasters, but it also has people out there seeking justice and trying to help, right? And you have also like the Black and Missing Foundation, which does incredible work trying to get the word out for people of color, because people of color often aren't investigated in the same way folks that look like you and I are investigated, right?
Right, for sure.
And then Othram, who's doing some of the most impressive genetic genealogy out there. And they were offering free DNA tests. Like, hey, if you want to add you want to help, add your DNA to this so that we can continue to help people. And Othram only works with law enforcement, and they have been able to solve cases all the way back to like the 1800s.
Yeah.
It's so impressive.
It's crazy.
And so getting to see people in these spaces that are actually like on the boots, like on the ground, like boots on the ground doing the work is inspiring. It's super inspiring. And just getting to meet such incredible, like I got to meet Gabby Petito's parents.
Oh, wow.
At CrimeCon, and sitting there thinking like these people have just been through the most horrendously awful thing and a very public thing. And here they are trying to help other people, to share their story and help other people. Like, talk about resilience, talk about people just doing the most. Like it's hard to describe in words how powerful seeing folks that have been through so much can be.
For me, some of my most, I don't know, the shows that made me grow and think the most have been like with Dr. Catherine Ramsland. I interviewed her about her book about the BTK case. And then Dr. Michelle Ward, she did a study on Jeffrey Dahmer. And again, not talking about the murderers, but more of the impact on the community and impact on the victims' families. And also, my gosh, the families of the murderers themselves, like how these, events, just have this ripple effect for decades across an entire community or region of the country. And you mentioned Matt Murphy. I'm actually talking to him tomorrow about his book, The Book of Murder, which, oh my God, that's so good.
Please tell Matt I say hello. I love Matt.
I'm writing it on my notes now.
Real great and real nerdy, and I love Matt so much. And the Book of Murder is great. Like I had a chance to talk to him a few weeks back.
I saw that. I haven't listened to it. I didn't want to spoil like my brain, like
totally. No, totally. I totally get that. And Matt is just lovely and again, insanely tenacious in these things. And you think about because we think about the DAs just in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. We forget about the fact that as a DA, he has gone to many scenes, right? He's doing it like Matt's just lovely. And he is one of those folks that again, committed his entire life to this.
I'm excited to talk to him and just going through his book, like you said, tenacity, and he's very personal in the book, and I'll talk to him about it, but that tenacity and that caring of the victims and that search for justice. And when I had Joe Kenda on, he, throughout his books and television shows, he would just live off cigarettes and coffee. So I was like, all right, Joe, I got my, and I lifted up my cup of coffee. I'm like, I've made a pot of coffee. I'm ready to talk to you. He's like, oh yeah, great.
Right. Exactly. And Joe Kenda, again, we see Joe Kenda on Homicide Hunter, right? And his shows, and Joe Kenda is my father-in-law is retired law enforcement.
Oh,
and
okay.
He does not watch a lot of police shows because he gets frustrated how they get them wrong. Joe Kenda is the only one who watches.
You know what? He's been on my show twice, Joe Kenda, and it is by far, you can name any paranormal celeb, you can name anybody else, by far, it's my most listened to shows are the Joe Kenda ones. Like tens and tens of thousands more than the next person. Like Joe Kenda is a phenom for sure, and just a hell of a nice guy. Now you mentioned Matt Murphy with crime scenes, and this is a real ham-handed segue, but you're a paranormal investigator and you're a paranormal enthusiast, and what I want to do this year is feature more like homegrown haunts, I guess you could say, more places that aren't corporately owned, like historic places that are dedicated to preserving history that might have alleged haunted activity or whatnot. But I go for walks at night and I see that, oh, Darcy's got a live Instagram show. And so I click on it and you're dressed in your I don't want to say costume, but your period authentic clothing. And you're talking about the Kellogg House.
Yes.
Which seems like an amazing place, not only to visit, but to lead tours. Tell me about the Kellogg House.
The Kellogg is just such an amazing space. I'm so grateful to get to be in there on the regular. And So let's see. I'm like, what? There's so many things I can talk about the Kellogg. So I just want to point out, and I've said this to folks before, they do not make me wear the period appropriate clothing. I choose that.
Right on. I love it.
That is my full on, like, we talk about like nerddom coming out. When I took on this tour, I was like, can I wear full Victorian mourning? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, great.
Commit to the bit. Commit to the bit.
Oh, committing to the bit is probably one of the like strongest life principles that I adhere to. Like, if you're going to commit to the bit fully.
Word.
So the Kellogg House is on the grounds of the Heritage Museum of Orange County. And the Heritage Museum of Orange County is, by everyday workings, it's a hands-on learning museum for children. So school age groups come and we show them, like, here's Victorian life, and here's panning for gold, and here's our blacksmith shop, because we actually have a working blacksmith shop on the grounds. Here's what it was like in this, this gospel swamp area where there's nature, and what it was like for indigenous folks. Like, it's a full learning experience for children because it is owned by the Santa Ana School District. But the Kellogg House, we have two houses on the property. We have the Kellogg, which is a beautifully, fully restored Victorian home from 1898. And then we have the Mag Farmhouse and its two buildings, its water tower and its carriage house. And the water tower and carriage house have been fully restored. The farmhouse is a 5,600 square foot farmhouse. It needs a lot of TLC. And so it looks really haunted. Like, we think it is, but it also looks super haunted.
Right.
But Kellogg was built, and this is where like the cool local history comes in, right? The Kellogg was built as a wedding gift by Hiram Clay Kellogg for his second wife, Helen Kellogg. And he built this beautiful, like almost like nautically themed, because it definitely looks like a house you would see maybe on the East Coast. Has a widow's walk. It has that kind of, I don't know, Nantucket vibe to it. And he builds this house, and he builds this very much around his own design ideals. But it's incredibly designed. Like, as also an architecture nerd, for a smaller Victorian, he uses every bit of space that he can, because back in the day, the tax codes were written that you didn't, if you built like a house with 4 bedrooms and then built 4 closets, you would be taxed for 8 bedrooms. And like, nope. So this is where we see the rise of like armoires and dressers and wardrobes, right? Because tax codes. But Hiram, even though he was the first civil engineer in all of Santa Ana, we truly know that Hiram loved sailing in ships. And I believe that Hiram would have been a ship captain in another life. And so he, like a good ship captain, uses every inch of space that he can, but also has this incredible design eye. Like, the house had the first indoor plumbing in all of Santa Ana. Mm-hmm. It had the first electricity in all of Santa Ana. And it had a forced air system that we might call like air conditioning, but it wasn't like a refrigerant-based air conditioning system. And so we get to really see what his kind of, how he like put together this house. And it's incredible because we not only, even though the house has been like redone, we also have an original copy of the plans for the house in what we call the architecture room, which really pays homage to Hiram, because Hiram didn't just do this house. He has his design and engineering footprint spans all up California, all up and down California, and into other states like Hawaii and Arizona as well. So people interact with Hiram all the time, and they don't even know they're interacting with him. So it's a stunning house. But I say, like, even though Hiram designed this house, this is Helen's house, because Helen lived in this house until she passed in 1963 at the age of 93.
Yeah.
And we don't think that Helen left the house. And there seems to be some other folks who are in the house, and we don't quite know how they got there. So, and I also, based on some investigation stuff that has happened as well, we also think Hiram may come and go from the house too. So child spirits, both of the Kellogg's, just all kinds of things happening in that house.
Yeah. So yeah, you get to do these like historically accurate, like tours and whatnot, are people like, what's like the percentage of people that are like going there because it's haunted, or they're going there because it's a neat old historic place and they just like history? Or is it kind of just a mix of both?
I think a lot of times, because we say at Haunted OC that we do haunted historical tours.
Right.
And I very much stress that. I'm like, look, we're not a rigged attraction, y'all. Like, no, I'm not going to say like everything's historic. And then, someone dressed as something is going to pop out and do jump scares. Because to be perfectly honest, like I don't do jump scares. Like so as an investigator, I can sit in the dark. I can look for stuff. I do not want to go to horror nights. Like I don't do well with that, because I get real fighty and I don't want to ever hurt anyone. So I just don't do well with jump scares. But I would say majority of the people, and I make a joke on both of my tours. I say, how many of you are here for the ghosts? And you get big hands. How many of you are here for the history? And you get some hands. And I'm like, how many of you were drugged here for someone who's here for the ghosts? And usually we get a couple hands. But I tell people, I said, look, if I don't get you with the ghosts, I'll get you with the history. And if I don't get you with the history, I'm going to get you with the architecture. But I also feel that like part of my responsibility as a tour guide, because I was given basically the fundamentals for this tour and then I put it together. My responsibility is to be a good tour guide, like engaging and funny and interesting, because nobody wants to come on a boring haunted tour or a boring historical tour, or much less a boring haunted historical tour.
Oh, yeah.
And so I look at it as a space to educate people and tell them about the hauntings, but also really tell them about the history, and it's a space for me to educate people about Victorian death culture, because part of my academic realm is death, dying, and grief in American culture. And so getting to have a captive audience where I can talk to them about mourning customs and, how the Civil War and embalming changes are not just the funeral industry, but the Civil War is why we have a national cemetery system and is why we now can identify our soldiers, because those things were not in place when the Civil War happened, because we were a very young country at that point, right?
Right.
And so thinking about how I get to engage folks in these ways, I take it as a big responsibility, but I also and I was just having this conversation the other night with some guests, I feel really responsible for how I tell the stories of the people, like you said, that no longer have their voices. So I want to make sure that I'm not doing more violence. I want to make sure that I'm not telling fantastical stories that don't actually have any grounding in any evidence that we have or any historical facts. Like that drives me a little bit nuts. And, I think one of the things that we tell a real challenging story about Helen on the tour. And when we first started the tour, we were kind of leaving her there in history. And I was like, I don't want to leave her there in history. I want to tell some other stories about Helen that are like what I call cuter stories about Helen. Because I think about the fact that if I, as a human being, die and then someone decides to come to my house and give tours, how I would feel, about the worst thing I ever did being told over and over again to a paying audience. Yeah. And what does that do not only to her legacy, but also to the energy in the house?
Mm.
So we brought in these other stories, these firsthand accounts that I have from folks, from former staff in the museum, and it changed the house. It changed the house. And so that's important to me. But I'm also very, clear with guests that I'm like, I don't condone what she did. I'm not going to be one of those historians that was like, it was a different time. That's just, to me, that's gross. Because yes, it was a different time, but we can also be good historians and understand why the context has been provided to us as it has and how we can fill in those silences. That's what we do in American studies. We're looking to fill in the silences. And so it's important for me to continually fill in the silences. And the tour I'm now 2.5 years in with the Kellogg. it has evolved over time as I continue to do research. Because one of the best things about working at a university for me is having access to all those databases.
Oh yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And so I on spare time will look, do these searches and find things. And then I bring those into the tour. Even Hiram and Helen's story of how they, got together and got married. We originally thought that they, got married in the afternoon. And then I found a newspaper article recently that let me know they got married at night and not at the train station, but at a local hotel in Oregon. So then I feel it's my responsibility to update that. Right. And so to me, when we're going into these spaces, people are coming on a haunted historical tour. I want to give them real history. I want them to learn. And I think one of the privileges that I have is that I get to engage history in a really cool way that hopefully makes people want to engage with history, because for so many people, they don't see themselves in history. They don't know how to connect with history because people just told them about like great man and great woman history, or, top-down history where it's like who won and then everybody else. And so to me, I'm like, no, let's talk about ground-up history. Let's talk about everyday, the everyday history is also just as important. So
yeah, just even a second ago, you were talking about something as ho-hum as how houses were taxed, because closets being taxed as a room, like, oh, wow, big deal. Yeah, well, that's super interesting. And that opens up other doors. It opens up like a look into the culture or just the times, like just that history, like it keeps unraveling itself. And that's what's super exciting to me as I get older and reading about, different places and why places might be haunted. Now, here's the thing. This is not like a known haunted place in Nebraska, but my friend Andrew, who was on an episode or two talking about a house he rented in college, a grand old beautiful house that's been transformed into like apartments for college students and whatnot, or smaller families. And he saw a full-bodied apparition of a woman. The person that owned the house saw the same woman and even asked him, hey, have you seen the woman yet? Other people that had rented a house have seen the woman. And like going through records of who owned the place when he went to college there in the 90s, like nobody, and even before, people couldn't figure out like who this might be. But with the advent of all these newspapers getting scanned and being thrown into databases, I think I've solved who it could be. It could be one of two ladies. Two ladies have died in this place, related. One was the mother, one was the daughter, 30 years apart. That wasn't available in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Right.
And now I'm just doing searches and I'm like, whoa. And I pull up this stuff and like, it's cool how things, if you're patient enough and you keep looking, things can reveal themselves and you learn a fuller, richer history of a location, haunted or not.
Oh yeah. And for me, like those silly, quote unquote silly or little facts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I talk about the house having indoor plumbing and I make a ridiculous deal as people walk through the bathroom. I'm like, get ready, everyone. It's the most historic place you're walking through all night. And because they're like, what are we about to walk through? And then I'm like, the indoor bathroom in all of Santa Ana. And so when they come through for that last room of the tour, I said, look, I know I'm making this big deal about the bathroom, but I have to give you context for that. And the context is this house was built in 1898. Most people in the United States didn't have plumbing until the 1930s. And then if you lived in a rural area, you didn't have indoor plumbing until the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
And then most recently, I had someone on a tour because I thought I had some folks who had said oh, my grandparents didn't get it until the 60s. I had someone recently that told me their aunt and uncle did not have indoor plumbing until 1972.
Wow.
So when we think about that, and I'm like, we've talking about 80 years between this house having 2 bathrooms and your aunt and uncle getting indoor plumbing.
Well, get this. My dad, and I told you I just turned 50 in October. My dad, when I was born, was 70. My dad was born in 1904. So he would tell me things about growing up in Beatrice, Nebraska, before he became a touring musician in the 20s.
Yeah.
You know, like he would tell me these stories and me in like 1978, 79, 80, 81, you know, I'm like, what? Like that seemed crazy to me that my dad was. And now I think about it now and I'm like, it's insanity. Just like how much things have changed and like, you know, yeah, you're talking about indoor plumbing, like big deal. Well, yeah.
It is
Yeah,
right.
right.
Right. Like it is a big deal. And I think it's those places where we can capture folks and we can help them understand, again, historical context, because we are so much about the here, the now, the present, the as it is, the finished product, right? And I talk to students about this all the time. I'm like, you all see finished products and you think, and a lot, I see that them get caught up in this. I go, you get caught up that you have to do it perfect the first time, and that there are no drafts and there are no edits. And it's all about drafts and edits. It's all about rehearsal. It's all about practice. It's all about refining your craft, right? And so when we're looking at, you know, this historical timeline, right? Like my father grew up in World War II. He was born into World War II and he had radio, and then he saw the invention of television. You know, like, and then he saw the internet and he was fascinated by it, right? He just loved that, the idea that we as humans could come this far, right? Fascinating to him. And so again, like you said, if we're patient enough, like people all the time get like, oh, you don't know about this location. Well, you know how much deep dive I do on just one location? And that I'm continually uncovering things and I'm continually digging up that history. I'm like, to really put together a complete history. And I think this is where I'm very happy that I understand academically how this can be, because you just dive into a thing and there are constant, you know, times of hurry up and wait. Like I found all this stuff and then it dries up for a while and then you find new stuff. So when people are like, how come it takes you so long to put together, you know, a book or someone to write a biography on someone, because uncovering those things takes a lot. And then you get a curveball or you get new information and you have to update the record. If you're going to be a good historian, and I'm not even just talking about trained historian, if you're going to be a good historian, armchair historian, do the work, be patient, and be willing to know that you don't have all those answers, right? But we talk about that in the paranormal all the time. The people who think they have all the answers don't.
Boring.
I don't have all the answers. I have so many more questions, right?
It's boring. Oh my God.
Boring. Like, okay, cool. Then explain to me this. And then they can't.
Right.
I'm not that confrontational.
Well, right. And it's when people think they have all the, I don't know. Yeah. You have the open-mindedness to believe in something persisting after bodily death, but then you stop it. Then you're like, then the door is closed. Like a ghost is a ghost, and that's what it is. And next, I'm like, what? No, like,
I know. And to me, I'm like, I don't want to know everything. How boring would life be if we're just like, got all this info now?
Yeah, just 2 weeks ago, I heard another live lecture by John Tenney. Shout out, Mr. Tenney. And it's like, you know, it's
hello,
like,
Tenney.
It's almost like how do I say it? This is what I mean. It's almost like having this mind-opening drug that you're ingesting, but you're sober. You know, like, I'm sober guy. But like this mind-opening drug to these concepts that just keep, and it's just so incredible. Like he'll just open up a door and just, invite you to walk through it. And there's other guys or people in the paranormal like that are not afraid to, reconsider. Kind of my catchphrase this year is reconsider everything. So haha, but just kind of reconsider what things might be, and don't have this notion that you've got it all figured out. Because these mysteries, the older I get, I don't think we're supposed to figure out the mysteries. At least I'm not going to figure them out. So the fun is in the pursuit of learning as much about these things as possible, and reading as much and talking to people who have had experiences. That's super satisfying to me, for sure.
I love learning. Like I love learning not just about paranormal stuff. Like I'm totally the person that someone, if they're like, do you want to go on a tour of the harbor and learn how, the harbor does its work every day? Totally. Why not? And some people are like, well, that's boring. No, it's fascinating to me, right? Because all of these experiences inform other things. I will absolutely go on the tour. I want to go to the lecture. I want to learn about all kinds of things because undoubtedly the synchronicity of the universe will bring that up in some other way and be like, oh, you went on this and now you have this. And it's like, well, there we go. Like, awesome.
Right. And
awesome.
Before we started rolling tape, you and I were talking about that. We're both band nerds. And
yes.
Yeah. So I love like talking to not only like musicians about and composers about how they go about creating their content or their crafts or whatnot, but also like instrument makers and people that are like how, you know, you think a trumpet's a trumpet. Well, there's guys that have been tinkering with design, taking like tubing, like brass tubing and shortening it like a fraction of an inch or lengthening it in a fraction of an inch. And how does that change the resonance of the instrument? And like, we can get really nerdy about all kinds of things, but like, it's just super exciting or interesting to me, like how people just kind of apply creativity to something, and good craftsmanship could also be applied to like research, you know, but like how, taking all those things in order to find like a new idea or a new way of doing something, or even honoring the old instrument makers or the old musicians of the past. You know, it's just, yeah. Sometimes I feel like I talk about like these things and it's like old man radio hour. I hope people find like it, you know, like, hopefully they find it interesting, but it's like, you know, like,
well, what you haven't done is said back in my day. So we're great.
Right. This is my day right now. This is my time.
Right.
This is my time. I'm smarter now than I ever have been. I think, you know?
Yes. And I saw like a meme this morning that was like, I beat my personal record for days alive. Like, yeah, right.
That's a good one. I like that.
Yeah.
So you are also like super creative, great personality, but you translate that like on the stage too. Like you've done improv, you've done comedy, you've studied comedy, performance. You did this TED Talk. So like we've talked about Darcy, the researcher, Darcy, the tour guide and paranormal investigator, and like you've also like a performer too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like it's, you know, I mean, I think I try not to be, I will jokingly say like when I'm watching a show or something and be like, oh, they're a lot. Like, I think that person is a lot. And I'm not trying to be mean, but like I always work to not be a lot.
Yeah.
But I think that performance, you know, all of those things have informed where I am now. And yeah, I was a college athlete the first time I went to school because I was an adult returning student to get my degrees, but I was a rower in college.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah. And then my knees were like, no, we're not so much. And so after I had a knee surgery after each season of rowing, and then I was like,
yikes.
Let's hold on to my eligibility. It's really, the rowing wasn't the problem. It's just, this is not built for running. I was not built for running. And so,
and that's part of the training. Is that part of the training? A lot of running.
So much running.
Oh, okay.
So much running. Okay. Oh my gosh. Hills, 5 miles to warm up. Like it was
interesting. I thought it'd be more just upper body strength and all that kind of stuff, but it's endurance, huh?
There we go. Rowing, collegiate rowing, professional rowing is a full body sport because what you're not seeing is that your feet are tied into like shoes in the boat and your seat actually slides. So when you're watching rowers in the Olympics or, in England, right? It's like on the Thames, like you're sliding all the way up. So if you think about a rowing machine at the gym that has that sliding seat, it's because you're sliding all the way up.
I gotcha.
And bringing your hands over your knees and then like basically having this burst off to do the full stroke. So it is a full body sport. I know people always think, oh, arms. I'm like, no, your whole body. And so you have to train your full body in that.
Wow. See, like, what did I say? Like, I'm smarter now than I was 45 minutes ago.
Right.
I am.
So like with rowing, I was like, okay, I got to find some other things. And so I had gotten I was in theater at Orange Coast College, where I went for community college, and ended up on their improv, like their children's theater was one semester, and then the next semester was improv. And we did a lot of theater sports and theater games. And then I also ended up getting recruited in through one of my classes to speech and debate.
Mm-hmm.
And which I lovingly call talking for trophies. I was like, oh, I'll totally talk for trophies. Yeah, why not? And so that's where I think a lot of that started for me. But I also, when you're in fourth grade and they made you do a play and all of that, like I was always like, oh, this is exciting. I like this. And then from theater sports, I ended up being in an improv troupe for many years, different improv troupes. I did stuff with, I did training at UCB, but the place I really cut a lot of my chops was a place in Los Angeles called the Empty Stage Theater. And I'm still friends with incredible people from the Empty Stage. And ended up in a fully improvised troupe from there with my friend David and some other great folks, and very talented, incredibly funny, smart, creative people. And then when I moved over to UCB and some things just started changing, at the time, I'm going to throw another thing at you, Brian. I got asked to host and MC a burlesque and sideshow cabaret in LA at an amazing restaurant and theater space called El Cid. And during that time, I came out in campy, ridiculous outfits. Like I started in formal dresses and I was like, no, we're going to camp this up. So I had these ridiculously tiny burlesque looking outfits, but I wasn't dancing, and just kept the show going. And so one night, my friend Eva was like, oh, I booked you on my stand-up show. And I was like, I don't do stand-up. And she's like, you do stand-up. I've seen you at the burlesque show. And I'm like, no, I don't do stand-up. And she's like, well, you're booked and you're hosting. And so it was like, I started doing that and was doing stand-up for quite some time. Some life happened that did not allow me to continue in stand-up. And this is one of the things, we talk about fandom being challenging. I ended up getting stalked.
Oh, okay.
And then could not promote myself anymore. So was like, well, I guess we're doing some other things now. And so but all that training, right? That is, because people are like, why'd you leave stand-up? And it's not something I talk about a lot, but it's a big part of the reason that I did. Yeah. But I also decided to go back to school. And so all of that improv training, all that performance training, public speaking, right? And I teach public speaking to students. I said, look, I didn't come out of the womb doing this. Like I have trained for years. And I tell anyone, I go, whether or not you want to be a performer or not, take an improv class. Learn how to think on the fly, because it will help you in everything that you do. Not necessarily for a joke, but I don't ever worry about presenting live, because if there's a problem, it doesn't throw me for a loop. I don't freeze up on stage. I'm not like, oh, that whole thing is ruined. It's like, no, we just keep moving through. And those skills help me in everything that I do. And, getting a chance, you brought up the TED Talk, which again, I so appreciate you spending the time with, because that is something that I'm very proud of. And, getting to have that, be asked to be in that stage, because TED is not something you just go like, oh, I'm just going to do TED. Right. You got to apply. You've got to have a proof of concept, and then be approved, and then work with people for a whole year. Don't you workshops and everything? It's an entire process. It's not just oh, I knew a guy and I got a TED Talk, and so that was huge. And, with TED, especially with TED, I asked them, I go, do we have teleprompters? They're like, nope. They said, you can have note cards. And I was like, I'm not going to have note cards. I'm going to know this speech. I'm going to know this talk. And so all of those things, right? And I'm funny. I just, I'm a funny person. And I joke with people. I said, you could tell me that you find me unattractive, whatever. I'm going to shake that off. I'm not for everyone. Fine. But if you tell me I'm not funny, we're going to have problems. I'm hilarious.
I'm offended now. Right.
Right. Like, how dare you? How dare you? But comedy, I love comedy, but I still bring comedy into what I do with tours and what I do with teaching, and I love the time that I spent in stand-up, and it, as frustrated as I was to have to kind of walk away because of other people's choices, having to make choices for me. I'm really grateful because I use all those skills still. Like I can put together an entertaining tour. I can engage people in ways that are helpful. And, there's the public facing part of my work, but the other part of my work I do is I am a coordinator with students, and I sit with students in a lot of hard moments.
Yeah.
And I think that ability to engage, but also to make for easy inroads with people is really important, because people want to know that their stories are important and that they feel seen and heard. But I also, I tell people, I'm like, if you want me to talk on anything, like, just tell me what you want me to talk about and I'll do it. So, like,
I can relate. I can relate. Like, and I think my musical training has helped with a lot of things that I do, like with Necronomicast, like getting up in front and talking to people, whatever it is. Because I've stood up in front of people with my trumpet in my hand and really really laid an egg, like or screwed something up, gone for the high note, missed it. You know what I mean? Like it's there's preparation involved, and then you also have to battle nerves and anxiety and imposter syndrome. And there's all that. But then there's just such great joy and like collaboration with people and working together and presenting like a musical idea or something like that. And I did like 25 years of musical theater, playing in pit orchestras and stuff. And just the people that I met working in that environment too, like super creative, like people that can memorize 2-hour musicals with dance moves, with costume changes.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just like, holy shit. I'm sitting in there in a dark room with my trumpet and the music in front of me. And that's challenging enough for me. But these people are up there killing it on stage, being funny, being charismatic, singing on pitch, dancing, and then having to change costumes 3 or 4 times. I'm like, God, I'm the dumbest guy in the room.
But here's the thing. But you come from a band background.
Yeah.
A marching band.
Sure.
You're doing all that anyways, right? You have to learn the steps. I have to go over here, but I'm also still playing the notes, and we have to go, and then the halftime show, but then we're playing in the stands, and then we're in a competition, and maybe we're in a parade. Like, there's all these things that we learn how to do, and it's a lot of multitasking. But then I think because it's like, oh, it's just that. It's like, did you see the show? Like, the show was incredible, right? And, thinking about music nerds, like DCI competitions.
Oh, yeah.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
That's Drum Corps International, everyone. Who might have
nerd. Yeah, you squares. That's Drum Corps International.
But like, marching band is all of those things too.
Amen.
Right?
Yeah.
But I also tell students, I go, yeah, I can do all that, but don't ask me to do high-level math.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's not my suit. But then I see students that are true magicians with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I go like, tell me about your magic. And again, it's not about one being better than the other or serving more. We need everybody.
Yeah, for sure.
We all have to be in this world.
I love it. And that is beautifully put. I love that individuality, that uniqueness, that everybody's got that gift. And what'd you say? Tell me your magic. How'd you put it?
Tell me about your magic.
I love it. I've had the best time sitting back the last hour and 10 minutes listening to you talk about your magic. And hopefully we've shared some magic together. And hopefully it's podcast listening magic for all of you out there listening on the Necronomicast. Darcy, if people want to explore more of your world and what you offer, your magic, I know is it at Darcy Staniforth? Is that your social?
Yeah, it's at Darcy Staniforth on Instagram and Twitter.
Mm-hmm. What's that? You mean X? What?
Yeah, what?
Huh?
You mean X?
What's it going to be tomorrow? Who knows?
And then I'm trying to get better about the clock app TikTok, but it's at Miss Darcy Staniforth. But if folks reach out and if they want to, hear about what I'm doing, I'm always happy to try and chat with people as best I can. I try and get back to folks as much as possible. So yeah, come find me. Let me know that you found me through the Necronomicast.
There you go.
So that we can, connect in those ways. But Brian, this has been a joy. Like, I could talk to you for hours, and I look forward to us getting to connect more about more nerdy, amazing things and continue to share magic with one another.
Yeah, for sure. And let's do, like, maybe I'll see you at some live event, or I'm intrigued that this crime convention is going to be in Denver. I love going to Colorado. And I'll say hi to Matt Murphy tomorrow for you. That's cool. But I make no bones about it. Like, Necronomicast for me is just a way for me to get smarter for myself. Like, it's very selfish sometimes. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, that person seems very interesting. I would like to have a conversation with her, or I would like to have a conversation with these people and talk about these things. And for you to spend the time to indulge me and my listeners, I'm very, very, very thankful. And this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, Darcy.
It is indeed.
Everybody, I've had the great opportunity to talk to Darcy Staniforth on this episode of Necronomicast. Please look at the show notes and find her. I will, with your kind permission, Darcy, I'll link to your TED Talk and other things.
Please do.
Just so you can get to know Darcy as I have. Darcy, thanks so much for being on the program.
Thank you.
Well, there we go, friends. Episode 289 of the Necronomicast, starting the new year off right. With this episode featuring my new friend, Darcy Staniforth. Like I said, I've been following her and reading about her and checking out her content for a long time now, and what a pleasure it was to have her on the show finally. All right, kids, coming up on the future episodes of Necronomicast for 2025. Got a lot of them done already, my goodness. Next, you get a sneak peek at an incredible, crazy documentary all about the heyday of the Jerry Springer Show. After that, New York Times best-selling author J.D. Barker talking about his career and everything that it takes to be a writer of his stature. I'm just looking over the rest of the guests here. Dave Schrader, Seth Breedlove, Shannon LeGros, Tim Banal, Greg Lawson. Making my way to episode 300. Sharing this all with you. Hope you had a great Christmas and a wonderful New Year's Eve celebration. I'm a little under the weather. That's why my voice isn't as chipper as usual. But I'm on the mend, and a lot of great things coming your way. 2025 is going to be a big year for Necronomicast. And I thank you for joining me and all my guests and the rest of the listeners on this journey. So until then, have a great night. Have a great life. Now go get some sleep.